Okay, my name is Brendan Edward Dillon. I was born on May 8, 1942, and I'm the second youngest in a family of 6. We were born in Ballydesmond by a midwife, no less, which is something kind of rare now. And I guess I grew up in Ballydesmond, went to the national school there, which was an interesting experience in the sense that it had a separate entrance for girls, a separate entrance for boys. And what I remember about the school is the education is that we had a big fire in the middle of the room, and my job was actually to get up whenever the fire was kind of low to go out and get some turf from the shed.
Right.
And it mustn't have been a great time, because I remember the highlight of our day was, or our year, everybody had to bring a rail of turf. That was kind of their payment for their education, and when your rail of turf would come, you got to get out of class and actually unload the rail of turf into the shed. So we all thought that was kind of interesting. But they used a cane back then, and some people in the class seemed to be picked on more than others, which always kind of concerned me. And you know, they give you 6 on either hand. When we went to Anna Blah School, there was a principal there, Mr. Tracy, who used to do it all the time. And one day, one of the students after school came in and broke into the school and got all the canes and smashed them all into little pieces and tried to shove them down the toilet. And he was obviously the hero of the school for quite a while afterwards, until they got a new set of canes. My mother taught in Anna Blah, so Joan and I actually, for some part of our career, went back to Anna Blah in school there with my mom, and we would go on Monday morning, come back Wednesday evening, and go back Thursday, and my dad would pick us up on Friday again. So we got a little different experience there. That was more rural than Ballydesmond. I often think about what we learned in school, and I think what we learned, a lot of memorization, which you know, wasn't such a bad thing. And I remember you know, it seems like we were very primitive back then. I remember the movies when they first came. Dermot Dwyer, who was actually a district superintendent in Ireland until he retired recently, he was a classmate of mine in Anna Blah School, and he was telling me how at the Quarry Cross, when the movies first came, the projector, to show how ignorant we were, they had a big tent, and he remembers going in, and for about 20 minutes they sat facing the projector before they actually figured out that the movie was actually behind them. So that'll tell you how. And I remember when I went to the movies in Ballydesmond first, I remember I sat in the front row with Bernie and Patch, I think it was. And when they started shooting, I thought I was going to get shot, and I went immediately under the front bench, and all I kept thinking was, I paid 10 pence to come in here and I could get killed? This doesn't make any sense to me. So we were very primitive people living in a small town, but one thing I remember, our parents really gave us an opportunity for an education. You know, it was very rare for anybody at that time to go beyond, you know, elementary school, and I got to go to Sacred Heart College in Cork City, which was a boarding school, and then we went to Carrick-Navarre for 2 years, and Bernie and Patch went to St. Augustine's in Dungarvan, and Sheila went to Montmellick, and Joan was the one who kind of went to the local school in Boherby. So I always remember that, and also I got the opportunity to go to UCC, you know, and Bernie went to UCD, and Debbie and Patch went into the Guards, and Sheila went to Montmellick, but then she went straight to the United States, I think, after that, and Joan went into nursing. So I give my parents a lot of credit for providing an opportunity for us to get, you know, a good education.
Yeah, I mean, again, this might go on, but I'm interested actually just on the movie, but the difference that, from your perspective, being a teacher now, you'd have a more acute sense of it in terms of, you talked about the discipline side of things, and how while things were certainly, we've changed a lot since then, how do you think it is now discipline-wise? Is it harder to get discipline without, not necessarily physical things, but kids are more in tune with?
No, I don't think so. I think kids are it's a matter of psychology, I guess. Is that sometimes we look on a class as a group, a mob, rather than looking at individuals and dealing with individual psychology. I think it's quite obvious we don't need physical force to create discipline. You can psychologically isolate people and in a nice way, without demeaning them. I think you can make them understand what their role is in that particular situation. And if they don't understand that, then you can always remove them from that situation. But in education, the thing I found the big difference between the United States, which I'm now teaching, and in Ireland, is that I think when I was growing up, there was much more emphasis on the memorization. In the United States, there's much more emphasis on people interacting with the material and questioning and asking questions. I remember even as recently as maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I met a teacher from Ireland, and she was asking me, "Oh, what do you teach?" I said, "Oh, I teach American history." And she said, "Oh, what are you doing in American history?" I said, "Right now we're discussing the Civil War." And she said, "What do you mean discussing the Civil War?" And I said, "Well, the students are providing their perspective, and they're asking questions, and we're interacting." And she said, and I said, "Don't you do that?" She said, "No, of course not." She said, "They don't know anything about history. I tell them what the history is." And that's kind of an alien, and I'm sure that's fairly rare, but the thing in the United States that I do like is there seems to be more opportunities for students getting involved in discussing. And there is a downside to that. I mean, she is right in a sense that the students don't know very much, and there's a limit to how far you can let them go. But one thing I remember from my boarding school, I memorized a lot of stuff. Shakespeare, Latin, Greek, that really it's starting to make sense to me. At the time it didn't make much sense, but now it's coming back and I realize, oh, that was really good stuff.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I can see a lot of value to memorization. The one thing in my education, we did Latin, Greek, Irish, English, history, geography, maths. We didn't do any science at that time, and I'm sure it's changed now, but that was one weakness I thought in my education. But overall, I thought we got good education.
Okay, good. Your parents then, do you want to, or even beyond, before parents, do you know much of the family history that you know?
No, the one thing I do know is that teaching seems to be in the family. My mother was a teacher, my father was a teacher, my grandfather on my mother's side was not a teacher, but on my father's side, he was a teacher, and his wife, I discovered recently, was also a teacher. I had a number of uncles who were teachers, and Uncle Brendan, Uncle Louis, they were teachers, Uncle Vincent was a teacher, and yet of the six of us, I was the only one that went into the profession, which I think was kind of interesting. But I understand there are now a number of my nephews and nieces who are in the teaching profession. So that was the thing I remember. I didn't know my grandfather, my grandmother I remember meeting once. She was in bed and she was very sick. I remember taking out this handkerchief that was all tied up and taking great pains to unloosen it, and she took half a crown out of it and gave it to me. I remember that. That was my father's mother. So that's really the only memory I have of that family.
Okay.
My mom and dad, I thought, they certainly provided all the opportunities for us, and I think it was great. My father had greyhounds also. He had greyhounds, and one of the great sayings I remember, he would walk the greyhounds every evening, and we'd be walking out to O'Connell's Cross, which was about a mile out, and you'd see somebody coming in pushing his bicycle going in for a pint of porter in the pub. And I remember my father turning to me and looking at his greyhound and looking at the man, and he said, "Every one of us with our own weakness." And I thought that was very true. So the family members that we grew up with, do you want me to give you a little analysis of each of those? Okay, I think we're all very different. Debbie was the eldest, and I remember he had an NSU motorbike that we thought was the greatest thing ever. And Debbie was kind of seen as the leader in the sense of he was the eldest, and he went to Multi-Farnham. Sheila was always the one who read the books. In fact, she even had in our address Green Gables, Ballydesmond, she would put. Bernie was tough, determined always. Bernie wanted something, he was going to get it. You had to admire, and whatever he did, play football or whatever, he was just solid. You could depend on him. He was like a rock. Patch was more sensitive, more easygoing, I think. And Joan and I probably were closer together because we went to Annabla together, and you know, we got to know each other pretty well. And Joan, you know, was a person who was always very conscientious. So I was fortunate, I think, to be with a group of siblings that were, you know, even though they were different, they were all still very conscious of family. Which,
Right. So how would you describe yourself then?
Myself, I was always the one who was a little offline, you know, very nervous, I think, very overly sensitive, overly scrupulous, overly everything. And I think it took me for a while to get grounded and find my way. But I think I was probably ultra sensitive to things.
Right. Okay. That come from being, you know, later on in the order of siblings.
I don't know. You know, there's all kinds of studies they do on that, and I don't know. It could be.
Okay.
It could be.
All right. That was a good actual talk about the siblings. Actually,
I hope no
That's
one
quite
takes
good.
offence at that, because I'm just trying.
That could be good material to use. All right. And just back to the parents now. Just anything else
Yeah.
you want to describe about them?
My
I mean,
mother, you know, I always like her favourite song was Sliabh na Mán, you know,
Okay.
and she used to sing it occasionally when you get her going, and she was such a good person. I remember when you'd go to the dance sometime, and you know, you'd kind of say, well, you know, and she would slide you a little extra money always to see that you were okay. And my dad, I think, was always very, you know, very solid. There was one thing I did though that I kind of regret. He had these greyhounds. One was called Hilarity and the other was called Kerry Cuteness. And Hilarity, I guess, was a pretty good dog, and was racing in Tralee one night, and my dad gave me £0.50 to put on Hilarity, and I don't know, I must have been 9 or 10 years old at the time.
yeah.
But of course I was too smart for that, because I saw the name of another dog who had a better name, so I put it on that dog, and our dog won. And of course I never had the nerve to tell my dad that I didn't put the £0.50 on that. So those are the things we wish we could go back and change.
Yeah.
But Dad was a huge fan of Kerry football, and we used to go to the games
Okay.
in Killarney and Tralee. I remember the first pair of football boots I got from John Dowling, who was the captain of the Kerry team and the centre fielder. And it wasn't until I got to university in Cork that somebody pointed out to me, "Excuse me, Brendan, but you're from Cork, I think? Why are you cheering for Kerry?" And eventually I had to go. I was actually in the same class in UCC with Billy Morgan, you know, the Cork.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess I've become a Cork fan since then. But I still have a soft spot for Kerry.
But that's interesting because your dad is from Cork as well.
He was from Kerry. No, my dad was from
Kerry.
Kerry. He was from Lisselton near Listowel.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the favourite things that I remember growing up is going to Ballybunion. My dad's family was back there. We'd stop at Ballyconry where his brother Louis, and then we'd go on to Ballybunion to the Strand, and that was a joy. I still remember coming over the hill and seeing the seaside. It was just heavenly. And also we used to go to Tralee. About once a month we would go to Tralee, which was huge because they had Woolworths, they had 2 bookstores, Hurley's and Collins's, and they had the comics, the Dandy and the Beano and the Hotspur. We thought we were in heaven when we'd go to Tralee. And my mom used to take us into this little restaurant, still remember the name of it, the Adelphi, to have a little cake or pie and a cup of tea, and that was heaven for us.
Very good. Any other things, just differences now between growing up back then, really, and you know how you'd see life today for be it children or adults or otherwise?
Yeah, well, we had no electricity, of course. We had gas lighting, which was good. We had no running water. I remember we had a big barrel outside the house where we'd capture the rainwater. That's what we'd wash with. And we had to go to the well. How we didn't get killed going to the well, because we didn't want to walk the half a mile with the bucket and walk back, so we used to ride our bicycles. And now when you're about 10 or 11 on a bicycle holding a big bucket of well water, how we didn't get killed, I don't know. But the well water came right out of the ground. It was absolutely so pure and so fresh. That's where we got our water from. And of course we had a bath. You had your weekly bath on Saturday night or whatever. And so that's different in the sense that we had a big battery radio, so we didn't have TV, of course, we had radio. But it's like everything else, like Joan was saying earlier, you know, we had nothing to compare it to, so we thought, hey, this is fine, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
And the radio was great, I loved the radio.
Very good. So you didn't, I mean, it's interesting being, I guess, having teachers as parents and, you know, teaching.
Well, that was different, having teachers as parents, because at that time there was a kind of a real kind of a social class distinction in these towns. You had the priest who lived in the presbytery, and he was like God. I mean, there were stories told he could turn you into a goat if you looked at him the wrong way, and he was kind of separate, and he hardly ever spoke. You know, he intermingled casually, except with the master, the teacher. And so he would come by and he would chat with my dad. I remember one time, he used to go on Wednesdays up to Cork City to see the movies, and it was when Moby Dick came out. And I remember him coming into my father and saying, "Pat, you could tell it was a plastic whale right away." That's what I remember. The one moment of levity I remember about the priest.
Yeah.
But people would come to my dad to get papers signed, you know, or to write letters for them to the government, because he was the teacher. And the guards used to hang out there all the time. And occasionally you have a couple of people. You had one guy, he was named Dillon. When he'd get drunk, he would come up and he would, you know, to get a bit of a handout. And he used to always say to my father, "Am I straight up?" So there was a kind of a saying, we used to say, "You're straight up like Dillon," was a joke.
Meaning what?
I'm not drunk, I can stand up straight. And there's another guy, Sean Loughlin, who used to poach salmon in the river, the Blackwater just right by us. And the way they used to do it, they had these pikes and they would put this sodded turf and they would douse it with petrol, and they would light it to dazzle the fish, and then they would gaff them when they were coming upstream to spawn, which was illegal, of course. And then he would come and he would sell the salmon to my dad. And I remember one night we had this huge salmon being in the range, being cooked, and the guards were over for supper. And Guard Carey knew that this was a poached salmon, you know, and he knew it, and he pretty much knew where it came from.
Right.
So he kept pestering my mother. "All right, Bridie, who gave you the salmon? Who gave you this?" Of course, she would never tell him. But I thought that was kind of interesting how they would come because they felt that, you know, he would probably take care of them.
Yeah, very good. That's very good.
Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to tell you, that we very rarely called people by their last names back then. You know, you had Mick the Post, you had Bill the Butcher, you had Con the Cooper, and then you had people with the names of their fathers like Tom Dan, you know, Tim Tate Mikey, Denny John. So that was really kind of different. I don't think you see much of that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of ancient, a way you remember people.
But the other thing as well, the names. I mean, my dad is William Byrne, but would he have been known as Bernie growing up, or?
Yeah, I think, yeah, Bernie.
Same with Joan.
Yeah.
Christened one name.
Yeah, I think they're christened one name, and I don't know, that's a good question. When does that take hold? I don't know. But Bernie, I always remember Bernie as Bernie. I never remember him as William or Bill or anything. No. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, alright. Now, what else did we... you've done well there. You talked a lot without much leading questions. Let's talk a little bit just about the US then, and, you know, the decision-making process there in terms of coming over and...
Well, I came over for a vacation on a J visa, you know, student visa, and worked in New York. And I don't know what it is. It's something in... I guess you feel you want to travel, want to see a bit of the world when you're young. So I went to the Bahamas for a vacation, and I was running out of money, so I went to the local school and see, "Are you looking for any substitute teachers?" And they just happened to be looking for a substitute teacher. This teacher was out sick, and she never returned for the rest of the year. So I stayed the whole year, and you know, I stayed there for 6 years, and that's where I met Mary Ann, my wife, who's from Iowa, which is how I ended up in Iowa. So I've thought about that. Why did I come to America? And I think it's the spirit of adventure. Just when you're young, you want to go places and see places, and you know, going back and forth wasn't as easy then as it is now. So when you made a bit of a move, it was kind of a move.
Yeah.
you didn't change it partly. But
And did your siblings been over here before you have any influence or otherwise? Joan talked about Sheila coming back and.
yeah, Sheila was the first one to come over, and I think when you have somebody here, it's nice. I mean, Sheila gave us the opportunity to stay with her on numerous occasions when we first came over, and Joan too. So when you have siblings here already, I think it makes it easier for her.
Okay. And in terms of your parents, do you think it affected them much having their kids abroad, or were things different then anyway? You'd move out of the house and then you'd be gone, and return rarely or not that often, or how do you think that?
I've often thought about that, and in the sense of what their feelings were about different things, and in a sense, I suppose they epitomized the way that parents should be, in the sense that you teach them everything you think they need to know, and then you have to kind of let them fly. And that's the hardest part, I think, for some people, is letting people fly. And I think they did that very effectively, and they never said, oh, you have to come home or you have to do this. And I'm sure it was something they were not too thrilled about, but...
Yeah, because it's interesting, there's nobody even in Ballydesmond now or in the vicinity, right? So everyone's kind of moved away from that area.
Well, I think it might be making a little bit of a revival, in the sense that there are some new houses I think they've built around the area.
Sure.
But a lot of the old people who were there are certainly gone.
Yeah, but there was no farm, let's say, in your family to tie you to the location.
No, exactly,
So,
exactly. It was professional, I guess.
Okay. I'm interested as well, a slight aside here, in terms of teaching and how the roles changed. Like you say, back then, you had the role of the priests obviously changed. The role of the teacher in terms of their position in society as well has changed. And how has that come about? Why has that happened? And is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, that's...
From
I think
more the teaching perspective.
Yeah. From a teacher's perspective, I think... I know in the United States, teachers are being asked to do more and more with less and less. They're now dealing with social working, things that should be dealt by social workers and so on. But I don't think that teaching per se has changed. Kids haven't changed. People always say, oh, the kids nowadays, they're not... Kids are the same today as they were 40 years ago, in my opinion. I find kids are the same. They want to learn. Some of them don't want to learn. It's just the same. You have, the old saying is, as a teacher, is the sale doesn't begin until the customer says no. So you have to remember that you have to connect with them in some way. So that hasn't changed. The perception of people, it depends on the community, I think. I think in the more upscale communities, parents value education, they value teachers, they support teachers. In other areas where they're not as well off, or they don't have as many resources, or there isn't a history of education and professionalism, that tends to kind of, repeat itself. So the biggest thing is that students are coming to school now, I think, with more issues. Health issues, psychological issues, and public schools, I know in the United States, we accept everybody. So that's a bigger challenge, I think, for teachers today. But I think teachers today in this country are doing a terrific job, and I have a lot of admiration. I don't think their status has gone down. I think people still value teachers, I really do. Mm. Especially good teachers, I think, are really valued by parents and by communities.
Good, okay. Sorry now, just looking over notes here. Did you have anything else, Brendan? We seem to have covered a lot. I mean, we talked quite well just about the growing up and the differences, the siblings. Any other experiences maybe on brothers and sisters that you wanted to?
Well, I think, and I don't want to this come across in the wrong way, with any sense of hubris or anything, but I think we all turned out pretty well. I mean, we're all still around, which is good at this age, and we're all seem to have made some success of our lives, which I think is important. haven't gone astray or whatever. So I think a lot of credit goes to our parents, who obviously pointed us in the right path, and of course a lot of credit goes to the individuals too, who kept themselves on. I think they did some productive work. So I'm pretty proud of that. Is that we have a family that I think, as they say, did good. You know, and that's good. And coming from an area where, the thing about a place like Ballydesmond is you're forced to think a lot. You have some dead time on your hands, you know, if you're not on a farm or whatever, and I think that gives you a chance to be a little more imaginative, hopefully, and to think about things, and you know, that was a good thing. Discipline was strict back then. Public schools, you know, I remember, boarding schools. We went to boarding schools, all of us. Those were, you know, not pleasant experiences. I remember I had a calendar in my little desk where every single day was kind of marked off until vacation. And it's interesting, when I was in Carrick-Navarre, which was in secondary school, going towards the Leaving Cert, I remember, because we were about 7 or 8 miles from Cork City, when we would leave, these taxi cabs would have to come and take us to the train to take us home. And at about 6 in the morning they would come in, and you could hear the cars on the gravel as you were in there. You'd hear the car. And to this day, whenever I hear a car driving on gravel, it brings back pleasant memories. So I don't know if that's an indictment of the school, but it was pretty disciplined, but it was good.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to just cover a little bit on growing up with Joan then as well, given that you spent most of the time?
Joan and I were probably closer together. We went on a blah with my mom at school, and I think Joan and I have probably been closer than any other two because of that. And we're also the two youngest, and I think that makes a difference. So we were closer. So Joan I have more contact with than anybody. You know, I come in here, you know, every year or whatever, and we've kept close touch. So yeah, Joan has been somebody that, you know, I have a lot of admiration, respect for, and yeah, we are more at ease with each other too, I think. You know, you're closer to some people than other. It's not that I'm not, you know, close to the rest of the family, but Joan and I have kind of, it's easier for us to be closer because we've been together more closely all our lives.
How did you find your mother as a teacher?
I never actually had my mother as a teacher.
Okay.
I didn't. No, I never did.
I know Joan did. She said she was quite tough.
No, I never had my mother as a teacher, so.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, just growing up in, well, maybe a bit in Ballydesmond yourself then, you know, sport or otherwise, what did you throw yourself into as
there
a
was
kid?
a team there, football. Yeah, my dad was very involved in the athletics. In fact, I think he was treasurer of the Munster GAA, but he had a team they were called Na Piarsaigh, you know, obviously very patriotic. And we played, but then Bernie and Debbie and I played for Drumtharaugh, which was about, you know, a while away, and we played football for them. So football was great. That was a great way of you know, spending the time. There wasn't a lot else going on in the town, really. You know, it was pretty remote when you look back on it now. It was pretty primitive in many ways, but I don't know. The Blackwater, of course, we went fishing and swimming. There was a big swimming hole in the Blackwater. And occasionally the circus would come, Duffy Circus, when they came, that was huge. They'd set up a tent there.
Yeah.
Or they used to come and have those plays, those old-fashioned plays like Noreen Bawn and Mother McCree and all of those would come every once in a while. A group would come and they would present that. By the way, it was in Hickey's Hall. And I remember that I joke with my wife Marianne about this. You'd be lining up to go in, and the Hickeys would come along, and they would just say, "We're the Hickeys," and they would be taken right through. So to this day, I say, "We're the Hickeys," which means, hey, we don't have to wait in line, we can just go. So that was at Hickey's Hall at the end, and that was a lot. You know, they used to have little raffles in between the plays. So it was interesting people, and you had a variety of people. There was a lady, Katie Billy, who lived just beyond the village, who terrorized everybody. And of course all the kids would come up and start yelling and screaming at her and calling her all kinds of nasty names and everything. And she was kind of not very clean and pretty scary. And I remember one time I was with a group of kids and they were yelling and screaming at her, and for somehow they disappeared and I was left on my own standing there. And she came out to me and she says, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Brendan Dillon." And in a very nice way she said, "Oh, you're Pat and Bridie Dillon's son, are you?" And she said no more. And I thought, not such a bad person, maybe.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was it Sheila or Bernie described how that sometimes got them off things, because there were sometimes people might be afraid to go up to your parents to say such and such was in trouble. So yeah.
Exactly. So those are memories that you remember. You know, you get a perception of people that might not necessarily be true. And but we used to get the milk. Then we'd have to go up to Nora Tomhay, appropriate name, and she was actually a survivor of the Titanic. She was 15 years of age. She was going over, and when the Titanic sunk, she was saved and came back and married and stayed in Ireland, never went back to America. But the other story was about Danny Buckley, who was from Ballydesmond, who was also on the Titanic, and who jumped in one of the lifeboats and supposedly hid under one of the women's skirts, or they helped him, and he was saved. And he wrote the famous one little song about our village called Sweet King Williamstown. He wrote the words to that song, which is a beautiful song. And he went back to America afterwards, and he joined the army, and he was killed on the last day of World War I. Doesn't that make you think about fate? That he couldn't quite escape his fate. So that was Danny Buckley. So there were some interesting people, you know, in the town too.
Mm. Entertainment-wise, then, just a little bit on that. I mean, you mentioned the cinema.
The cinema, the movies would come. We used to ride our bikes to Knocknagree. A friend of mine, Denny Jass, and I used to ride our bikes to Knocknagree. They had movies there twice a week. I think it was Wednesdays and Fridays. And it was about 5 miles on our bicycle. And we used to stop at the shop on the way, and we'd buy a Woodbine cigarette. You could buy one cigarette. And of course we thought we were in heaven when we'd be sitting there smoking our Woodbine cigarette, you know, at 14 years of age or whatever.
Yeah, very good.
Pretty primitive. That was our entertainment, if you will.
Yeah.
But the movies were pretty good down there. And then of course they had the Cayleys every once in a while. And we had a dance hall in Ballydesmond, Vaughan's Dance Hall, which was very famous all around. And interestingly enough, the most famous dance there was the teacher's dance. People would come from all over, and it was like in a big barn. But that would be on, I suppose, once a month or so on Sunday nights. They would have a dance there, and it was just mobbed with people from all over. So that was big entertainment in Ballydesmond.
And would you get out of, when you were growing up, get out of Ballydesmond much and into be it Tralee or Killarney?
No, not really. About once a month my dad would go to Tralee because he used to take his car to the Kerry Motor Works there. And that was about it. Never really go anywhere else.
Okay. What was a special treat for you then, growing up, that you'd remember?
Well, special treat would be, I think going to Tralee would be a special treat, where you could get some comic books at one of those stores or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember they had a Remington suit company across the way from Woolworths in Tralee, which I thought was interesting. They had those vacuum tubes, you know, where when you pay for something, they put it in this little thing and they squeeze it and they pull the thing and the thing goes flying up. And somebody up there then takes it out and decides how much it is, puts the change in and pulls. So those vacuum tubes were used, which is interesting because when I was doing some research on in Waterloo, on the Irish in Waterloo, I found that the James Black building, which was a gentleman from Donegal who founded that, had these vacuum tube system in his store as well.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of cool to watch. Yeah.
So maybe it was invented in Ireland.
I don't know.
All right, that's good.
All right, good.
That's, I think,
hope I didn't go on too much.
No, you find the experience of having their parents as teachers, find that affected them or otherwise, because of the standing in the community that you would have had, and were there any kind of knock-on positive or negative experiences from that you would have captured or remember?
Well, some people say that we might think we're better than other people. I mean, I've heard that said by non-Dillons, shall I say,
Yeah.
who said, you think you're better than everybody else, you're the Dillons, and it's kind of like we're the hickey. And I think there might be some truth to that. When you grow up in a society where your parents are professionals in a non-professional milieu, if you will, that probably some of that psychologically impacts you. I think it gives you a confidence though too. You have a kind of a self-confidence that, you know, hey, I'm okay. I can do a lot of stuff, I think.
But not to say the others in your family weren't thinkers now, but you, in your opening comments, you strike me as someone who's a bit more aware of your environment in terms of your standing in it or otherwise, and as I say, more sensitive to that.
Yeah.
Not in a good or bad way
Right.
in particular, right?
Right.
But so you might have picked up on that a bit more than the others, because the others were kind of saying didn't really kind of bear any impact on them, whereas you're saying it kind of.
I think
you
it
think
did.
you would have been a bit more sensitive to that.
Yeah, I think that the Dillons generally think they're a little higher than other people. They won't admit that, maybe. That's not something they want to admit, but I think deep down in their psyche. And that can be good and bad. It's bad if you use it to look down on other people, but it's good if you use it to give yourself self-confidence, that you are somebody, if you will, and you can do a lot of things. So, yeah.
Okay,
That's just my humble opinion. You were talking about you don't have anything to compare it to. When I was in Anna Blah, I remember a lot of those people were poor in the sense that a lot of people didn't wear shoes. I remember the great entertainment during recess was, if it was wet and muddy, you know, you'd create this long kind of area where people would run back and slide on their heels as far as they could go. You know, that was a huge entertainment at the time.
Yeah.
And when I look back on that now, I think, oh my goodness, that is pretty primitive. But it's using the resources that they had, which weren't very much. And another thing I noticed is that when we were growing up, we had a lot of warts and boils and stuff like that. There must have been vitamin deficiencies in our diets, because warts were very common, boils, and we used to use bread pudding poultices on them and stuff like that. So we must have had some, deficiencies in that area. And a lot of people were poor, I think. You know, when going to church, I mean, people were putting penny in the box. That was the common, 1 penny was the common thing they would put in the box when they were going to church on Sunday. And so they were poor. These people were poor.
Yeah, they talked, I mean, some of the others talked about, you know, people, as you say, people coming to school without shoes on.
Yeah.
But you always had shoes to wear, so
exactly.
From that perspective alone, I think the Dillons would have
Correct.
been doing well, right, relative to other people around. So.
Now, politics is another big thing I didn't mention. My father was a big Fianna Fáil supporter, and I remember on Saturday nights we would go around putting up posters on pillars for Sean Moylan or some of these things. And outside of church, the politicians they would like have a flatbed kind of truck. I mean, it wasn't a flatbed truck like today. And they would stand up there and they would give a speech after Mass on Sunday when they would capture the most people. And I remember one of them saying one time, he said, "If you vote for Fine Gael, you will sip sorrow with a long spoon." Forget that. Where he ever came up with that analogy, I don't know. But politics was very big and very, very bitter in the sense that it was still a holdover from the Civil War. Sometimes the Fine Gael people were called blue shirts. Remember, like the brown shirts and the black shirts of the Nazis and the fascists. So there was a lot of tension in that sense. But it didn't seem to come into everyday life. Only around election time, I think, you had that tension.
But blue shirts being a reference to what's...
I guess the Free Staters, after the Free State, began to wear these blue shirts, just like the Nazis had worn the brown shirts and the fascists had worn the black shirts. I think it was kind of a thing they had done to kind of provide some kind of unifying force with the army of the Free State. And of course it was pounced on by the Fianna Fáil. So that was the greatest insult. You could call them a blue shirt. And of course the other people on the other side would talk about devil era as the devil era. So depending on your perspective. But it didn't seem to enter into everyday relations with people. But they did feel strongly about their political parties.
Really, yeah.
I remember that.
So politics did play
Yeah,
a
and I
reason.
know our dad was a big Fianna Fáil supporter, I know that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's interesting, as you say, because not unlike yourselves, I mean, life was a lot simpler, right? And
Yes.
for everybody. And for that reason, did politics play less or more of a role in people's lives because of the unifying force or being part of the community or otherwise, or was it less
I
of an
think it
important
was-
factor because you're just struggling to get on?
Yeah, I think it was more of an entertainment factor,
Okay.
to be very honest with you.
Okay.
I mean, when I look back on it, I think it was more entertainment. You got fired up for the thing, and it's something new, something different, something
Yeah.
to do, and then it's elections all over, you know, you're kind of back to where you were. That's my reading on it. I could be totally wrong,
Okay.
but
Very good.
yeah, so I know.
Good. Okay, that was excellent.
And thank you
No,
for
worries.
taking the time to do this. I think it's important.